Hey everyone, this is the ThinkEnergy podcast, and I'm your host, Dan Seguin from Hydro Ottawa. Are you looking to better understand the fast-changing world of energy? Well, the ThinkEnergy podcast isn't your ordinary energy show. Every 2 weeks, we take you on a tour and discuss, through a communication lens, some of the coolest trends, emerging technologies, and latest innovations. So stay tuned as we explore some traditional and some quirky facets of this industry. This is the ThinkEnergy podcast.
Hey everyone, welcome to episode 19 of the ThinkEnergy podcast. Are women in power and empowered in the energy sector? If less than 1/4 of the electricity workforce are women in Canada, and less than 5% of those are in trades, what is being done to encourage a more dynamic workforce for the future that includes women? So here's today's big question. If the traditional energy industry is lagging behind on gender, are there areas in the sector that are seeing growth? What are they and why? To answer these questions today, I have the CEO of the Electricity Human Resources Canada, the leading source on HR information for Canada's electricity industry, Michelle Branigan. Welcome, Michelle. Are you ready to get started?
Absolutely, Dan. Thanks so much for having me here today.
Great. Maybe we can begin by you telling our listeners a bit about you and what drew you to the energy sector.
Well, I wish I could say I grew up with the dream of being in the energy business, but the truth is I really fell into the sector. I have a background in project management and business development, and having lived in Dublin, which is my hometown, Frankfurt, Toronto, and Vancouver, I ended up in Ottawa and took a position with what is now Electricity Human Resources Canada, or EHRC. I don't have an engineering background. I can't even change a plug, unfortunately. But I do find this industry fascinating. It's interesting. I think people can get caught up sometimes in wanting the perfect career, and it's great if you know what it is that you want to do from a young age. I wanted to be a police officer, but in Ireland, never quite made that height requirement that I needed, so I could never follow that dream. But it's equally okay to end up doing something that you never envisioned. It's really all about what you do once you get there.
What's it like to work in the electricity industry? Could you identify human resources issues facing the electricity industry? What are opportunities for the energy sector today and going forward?
What an industry. Well, it's never dull. There's never a dull moment. So many different folks have very different opinions as to which source of energy generation is the best, for example, for so many different reasons. At EHRC, we work right across the sector. So we talk with everybody. We talk with folks on the nuclear side of the business, and solar, wind, hydro, etc. But what has always amazed me about the industry is how passionate everyone is about working in the sector, regardless of where they're at or what hat they're wearing.
Not their own sector.
Not exactly. So I think that's fascinating. We're in an age of transformation. I think we're talking about this all the time. Disruption is a word that we're hearing. It's all around us in every sector, and I don't think the energy sector is immune to that. Energy policies, of course, are going green. New technologies are changing the grid of the future, and of course, the workforce isn't getting any younger. Include myself in that. Does that pose challenges? Absolutely. We are seeing so many employees retiring, people who have worked in this sector for decades. And so that means we run the risk of losing all sorts of institutional knowledge and experience that, quite frankly, isn't captured in a manual, right? That brain drain is what we're leaving. So we need to look at what we can do to attract, recruit, and retain that next generation of workers, and we're going to need to compete with every other industry across Canada. And I think that's important to remember, that most of the jobs in the electricity industry are portable in and out of the industry. There's probably 3 or 4 that are, purely electricity driven. And so many people are going to be competing for those who have a certain level of skills. Information communications technology, for example, you think about cybersecurity and the impact that on the grid, and that is something that keeps CEOs up at night. But again, banking, finance, all these other industries are all having the same challenges and issues. So it's going to be a very competitive environment. Does that mean it's all doom and gloom? No, I think every challenge is an opportunity for us. We released our latest labor market intelligence back in April. Workforce in Motion. And that's where we look at the demographics of the sector. We try and identify what are the critical issues, what are the occupations that are under pressure, and what are some of the challenges that we need to address proactively as an organization and as an industry. Interestingly, I found our industry has under 5% youth. So under 25s, only 5% in the Canadian electricity industry. That tells me a story. We need to be doing a much better job of attracting young people to this sector, right? Because it's about 14% across all other sectors. Women. We're still woefully underrepresented when it comes to the number of women in the sector. We're at 26% now. We went up 1%. So going on the right direction, but ever so slowly. When you start looking at the trades and the number of women in the trades, it's still deplorable. We're anywhere between sort of 3 and 7%, depending on the trade that you're actually looking at. And we have increased with the number of Indigenous people working in the industry. We're at about 4.7% now. We were at 3% about 8 years ago, but it's the fastest growing population in the country, and renewable energy plays such a big part of the Canadian energy conversation. Lots of opportunities to get Indigenous communities and Indigenous people and young people engaged in working in this industry. So I think we have an opportunity to tell a great story about this sector, about the jobs that exist and the career paths that you can take.
Well, great segue here, because the question that I had, the next one was, nearly a third, 32% of the global renewable energy workforce are women. Why do you think that is?
I think when you think about the next generation, and we spend a lot of time talking to young people. We have some programming on right now that has been a wonderful conduit to talking to those who are studying to get into the industry, working in renewable energy, programming and curricula, etc. And I find very much that the new generation of employees is very values driven. They care deeply about a meaningful commitment to diversity, minimizing environmental impact, and corporate social responsibility. And so young people need, and women need, to understand how their work actually contributes, not just to the organization, but how that organization contributes to society. And I think a job in renewables brings that to the table. So be that whether an individual is working on generation, energy storage and how that's going to transform the sector, energy efficiency, or even how we create green buildings. These are all things that have an impact on how we as human beings live, how we power our hospitals, how we power our hockey arenas for the kids, how we do everything, how we connect, how we get to where we want to be. And so I think a lot of women are very attracted to that whole side. And so again, it's all about telling the story and getting more and more women involved in that whole process. More and more youth as well.
Okay. How is the Electricity Human Resources Canada closing the gap in advancing the role and recognition of women in the sector? Like, how are you building that awareness?
Well, we've undertaken quite a body of work over the last decade. We've done a lot of research into the barriers for women actually entering and staying in the industry, because there's two issues there. First is the whole recruitment side. You need to get them in the door, but then once they're in the door, you need to make sure that you have an environment that's actually going to keep them there. And we know that in engineering, for example, a lot of women come in, but then leave after 5 or 7 years. So we've done a lot of work to look at the barriers around that. We've developed a Connected Women mentorship program, which supports, again, women who are either studying to come into the industry, and that can include being in a trade, or women who are already in a job but need some support to get to that next level. Again, women that are working here right now in the sector have told us that having a support network, having somebody to mentor them, has made the difference on whether they have actually stayed or not. That's made a big difference. Yeah. I'm very proud of our leadership accord on gender diversity. We launched this 2 years ago, and the accord is a visible commitment, and it brings together employers, labor and educational institutions to promote the values of diversity and equality and inclusion. And the idea is to, of course, increase the representation of women in our sector and beyond. We've actually now gone beyond just even the electricity sector with the accord. And the whole idea behind that is, you know how hard it is to affect cultural change, right? It takes a long time, but who has to lead that change? The CEO, the leader, the president of the organization needs to do that. And it's the premise of the accord that to affect systemic change, you need to have buy-in at that senior level. And industry leaders need to have a bold vision, but they need to do more than just talk about it. They need to set the standard for everybody in the organization to follow. So within the accord, the CEO must sign on to ensure that diversity commitments are actually approved internally. They're embedded in the organization's policies and procedures. They're visible to all stakeholders, and that includes other employees in the sector, right? And then incorporated into the organization's core business and HR strategy. And so those organizations will actually undertake an internal assessment themselves to see where they stand right now, what are the gaps, what are the challenges, what are they doing well, and then they must measure how they perform over a 2-year time frame. They report that back into EHRC, and they talk about any of the actions they've taken to implement any or all of those commitments. And it's been a fascinating journey. It's been wonderful to see some of the success stories that have come out of that. But I'm a big believer that, you know, it's not good enough just to talk about these things. We actually need to demonstrate how we're going to move forward. And if you're going to affect cultural change, we need to hold organizations accountable, and we need to quantify the impact of those actions. That could include bringing more women on your board. It could ensuring that you have a woman on the hiring panel, for example. It could mean sending more women to a conference to talk on your behalf, on your organization's behalf, particularly in relation to technical discussions. Okay. I go to many conferences, and it is changing ever so slightly, but it is still predominantly 90% men that are in the room, and so we still got a lot of work to do there. And I'm delighted that, of course, Bryce and Hydro Ottawa were one of our founding signatories to the accord. And I have to say, I'm very proud of all the leaders who've put their name to this, and are really committed to actually making that change happen.
So, I heard that you sit on the board of the Energy Council of Canada. Care to share some insight you've gained while being on this council?
Yeah, this has been a wonderful experience, and what's been fascinating for me is that the board, the Energy Council of Canada, looks at the whole energy sector. So it takes you just out of you're not just operating in the electricity environment. You know, we're looking and engaging with folks from the oil, from gas, from petroleum, and of course there are lots of challenges in those sectors similar to those on the electricity side of the energy business. And I think it's really imperative that We don't operate in silos, that we continue to share best practices along such a wide array of topics and themes. And the Energy Council of Canada really facilitates open dialogue to address current energy issues all across Canada, but also includes conversations within North America and looks at what's going on internationally as well as part of the World Energy Council. I would encourage everyone to always volunteer to join, whether it's a board or some sort of working committee. It helps with your own skills development as well. I always think we continue to learn from each other all the time, and it provides an opportunity to hear from others who may have different views to your own. I love that. I love being challenged. I think if you have everybody sitting in the room just nodding, you're not going to change the world. You're not going to get anything accomplished. So let's sort of mix it up a little bit. So anything that fosters that type of dialogue,
rattle the cage. I'm in favor of. And one of the initiatives I'm particularly proud of that the Energy Council of Canada has developed is the Young Professionals program, and that's a network that's been put together for young professionals, our energy leaders of the next generation, and they're given opportunities to learn and network from those working in the industry. How great is that from a knowledge transfer, and succession planning lens, and they have a voice themselves to bring what their thoughts to the table. We need to talk to these young people. They've got some really great ideas coming out, right? Absolutely.
Different ways of looking at things. So it's a really nice mix.
Cool. Okay, so your organization just released a report a little while back suggesting that by 2022, over 20,000 new workers will be required to work in the energy field. How are you addressing that demand? Do you see an opportunity to build partnerships with educational, I think you started touching on that, to build partnerships with educational institutions to support the future workforces?
Absolutely. Partnerships are absolutely essential. For employers, there must be a commitment to cultivating really close ties with educators, to influence the curriculum, to provide co-op placements and pre-apprenticeship programs. And I really think that communication is key. For me, communication is so important to every aspect of any business.
I would agree.
You would agree. But when you think about the next generation and educating the next generation of folks who are going to manage our system for the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, employers need to work with educators closely. They need to look at how jobs are evolving from a technological standpoint. We need to look at what jobs are under pressure, what jobs may not exist anymore. Meter readers is an easy example of that one in Ontario, and look at all the jobs that are having to transition away from coal. I look in Alberta when we have about 3,000 people that are being impacted by those policy changes and the move to lower GHCs, etc. We don't want to train young people for jobs that don't exist. We don't want educators to develop curricula for jobs that are becoming redundant. And I think as people look to the future of work, and everyone's very excited about the future of work, we're all talking about artificial intelligence and automation and digitalization. I'll put a plug in. We will have a report out on that in early spring. But we need to understand how technology is going to impact jobs and the skills that are going to be required to ensure that employees remain current. And so as we're looking to the future of work, how does that technology impact jobs? We know that advancements in artificial intelligence, automation will make workplaces more efficient, more productive, and collaborative. But at the end of the day, how do they affect the workforce? And how do we educate? How do we recruit? How do we train? How do we develop people who are going to build and manage the systems? And it's not just young people coming in or that next generation coming in. It's those who are maybe 35, 40, 45 now working in the industry, seeing their jobs change and want to be part of that transition because they know that they have another 10, 20, 25 years in their careers. So I think that's really important because we're trying to balance now legacy systems that are not going to change overnight, and at the same time deal with the cutting edge technology that we see coming in. Some fascinating things. I was looking at a pilot project where they're developing a solar farm in Australia completely made from 3D printing.
Really?
Yes, just fascinating. It's very exciting time, and we know that the partnerships that we have between the utilities and the colleges and the universities, and there's some very strong relationships to develop industry relevant programming and curricula really do make a difference. We're not a just-in-time industry, so we need to make sure that we're providing young people with opportunities, and we're giving young graduates an opportunity to start the career. And of course, you'll know this one, and this is a great program I've been following since its inception here in Ottawa, because Hydro Ottawa, working with Algonquin College on the Powerline Technician program, which has been immensely successful in training our next generation of power line workers, not just for here in Ottawa, but for beyond, right? And in Ontario. On the diversity front, we talked about diversity earlier and the need to get more women in this sector. Algonquin College is in its second year of its Save a Seat program. So that was a 3-year program that sees the college reserve 30% of its available seats. There are 4 programs for women. So 30% of those seats are saved for women. Electrical engineering technician, computer systems technician, electrical mechanical engineering technician, and mechanical engineering technology. And so that is a bold step for a college to take. Sometimes when you do things a little outside the envelope, there can be pushback from those who think that by giving to one group, you're actually taking for another. But we know the women, the numbers from a diversity perspective continue to be continually low. And if we're going to move and move quickly, we need to do things differently. So I applaud their foresight in doing that. And I'm really looking forward to seeing the results of the program.
Well, on that, what advice do you have for women starting a career in the energy sector?
Oh boy, this is always an interesting question. I would say be confident in your own ability and in your own opinions. I think especially sometimes young people, whether you're a young woman or a young man, but particularly young women, tend to be a little bit quieter and maybe not speak up as much. So I would say don't be intimidated by the people in the room. You have a voice. Don't apologize for your ideas. It's really important. I would say that I've learned in my career path, it's all about confidence, whatever your interests are. And I've suffered from this in the past. Don't feel like that you have to be a perfectionist or that you have to know everything about everything. Just be passionate about what it is that you do and go. Because sometimes I think women are socialized to be perfect. So they won't apply for jobs unless they can hit every single thing. You've heard this before, right? Yeah. And I would love to say that, we've read this and we hear it and so it doesn't apply anymore. But I talk to so many women at all levels or within an organization, sometimes going for more senior roles. And they've told me, well, but I haven't done this before. And they'll pick the one thing that they haven't done. Or I haven't had any experience in that. And you can learn as you go. So I'm still having these conversations with people. So sometimes we hold ourselves back. So be confident, I think, is one of that. And give it a go. Try.
Thank you. I'm sure they'll appreciate that. I appreciate that. Okay. Saw you at the airport, like I was mentioning earlier. So I'm assuming you do travel a lot.
I do.
So who would be your dream seatmate on your next flight? Someone you could spend 4 hours, 3 hours with and pick their brains.
I'm thinking of Chris Hemsworth right now because I'm watching a lot of Marvel movies with my 10-year-old.
So you've got Disney.
That's probably not the one you want to hear. I'm not going to say anyone in the energy industry because that's like, you're going to leave somebody out and somebody's going to be ticked off. I find this a hard one. There's a few politicians I wouldn't mind sitting beside. I really enjoy Hillary Clinton. If I was to go backwards, she's dead, but I would love to sit beside Betty Davis. I'm a huge film buff. She is probably my favorite actress, and she is a woman that was, I think, beyond her time and took on the Hollywood system, and was very forthright in what she did, and had a lot of grit and a lot of wit. So that's somebody that I would have really liked to have the opportunity to sit down and be stuck beside for
very interesting choice.
3 or 4 hours.
Okay, so here's my last question, Michelle. What keeps you up at night?
What keeps me up at night? I'm very excited about the direction that this industry is going in. And so I enjoy what it is that we do.
Even at the speed it's going?
Even at the speed that it's going. For me, it's fun. If it wasn't moving, if it wasn't changing, I don't think I would be as engaged. We have so many challenges, so many issues to address to make sure that we have the workforce that we need. A workforce that is supported to help our employers, to help our employees. There's so many opportunities to really diversify, to work with this industry, make sure that we're engaging young people. Lots of things to do. I have a to-do list that's a mile long. We'd love to do more things with getting young people, young kids, talking about this industry and talking about this and thinking about this sector as a career. Some of the things that I perhaps worry about is not repeating the past, the mistakes of the past. There can be a tendency sometimes when there's pressure on utilities, on any business from a cost perspective, to reduce costs. And so I worry when I see businesses maybe not taking on as many apprentices as they used to. And I know that's a challenge. I'm a businesswoman, so I can wear both hats. Mm-hmm. But I think we always need to be forward planning, and I think the risk of not doing anything at all, or looking at people as a cost to the business instead of an asset to a business, is a challenge that we need to make sure that we don't fall in.
Should be looked at it as an investment.
An investment in our people, because at the end of the day, your people are the assets that can walk out the door and not come back the next day. Yeah. So we need to make sure that we're addressing that, and that we're providing young people with opportunities. Again, I've talked about the story that we need to tell, the fact that we don't have enough young people working in this industry, and that we are going to be competing with the sexy businesses, the Spotifys, the Googles, those types of organizations. We need to do a better job collectively as a sector to bring that talent in the door. I'm very excited. We have a program called Empowering Futures, which we're working on with the federal government, and we're putting students through work integrated learning opportunities right across the country, where employers are taking these students on and providing them an opportunity through a co-op placement or an internship.
What level students when you say?
STEM students, so students that are in colleges and post-secondary education. And the program's actually been expanded to include the arts. Because you think of small businesses, you think of small renewable companies who need entrepreneurial type skill sets, marketing skill sets, communication skill sets to grow the business. So it's actually expanded to STEAM, and I've talked and met with some of these young people, and they have just blown my mind with how engaged they are. I want to see more of that, and I want to see our employers providing students with those types of opportunities. It's not just good for the students. It gives you an opportunity to showcase your company and give you an opportunity to build that talent pipeline. And we've been actually providing the employers with wage subsidies as part of that. So if anyone wants a Christmas present, tell them to make sure to reach out to EHRC. We can make them. We can make their Christmas green.
We'll do. Well, we might even we can provide the link on the actual
absolutely
on the podcast.
Absolutely.
Okay. Michelle, we've reached the end of another episode here of the ThinkEnergy podcast. How can our listeners learn more about you, and how can they connect?
electricityhr.ca is our website, and they can follow us on that, of course, on Twitter. We are on LinkedIn, and they can also contact me personally at LinkedIn. I meet with a lot of folks, including young people and students. We've had some great coffees, and I always think it's really important to make sure that we're reaching out and listening to those who are actually working in the industry or want to get into the industry. It's all about partnerships. I don't think any particular group can do it all on their own, whether you're an employer or an educator or a policy maker. So we love hearing from folks and talking about some of the things that we want to do.
Very nice, very nice. Again, thank you very much for joining us today. I hope you had a lot of fun.
Thank you. Real pleasure, Dan.
Hey folks, thank you for joining us today. I truly hope you enjoyed this episode of Think Energy. For past episodes, make sure you visit our website, hydroottawa.com/podcast. Lastly, if you found value in this podcast, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes, or maybe even tell a friend or a colleague. Anyway, this podcast is a wrap. Peace, everyone.